She disappeared for 17 years, then reappeared in his casino pregnant, bruised, and terrified. But what broke the Mafia boss wasn't her fear. It was realizing she was still protecting everyone but herself. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It was 3:27 in the morning when Ronan Vale pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Sapphire Coast Casino. The Atlantic wind howled behind him, carrying the sharp smell of salt and coming rain. His black coat was still damp with blood that wasn't his. Another meeting. Another warning delivered in a back room that smelled of gun oil and fear. He rolled his shoulders once, trying to loosen the knot of violence still coiled in his muscles, and stepped into the main lobby. Neon red and gold lights bled across the wet marble floor like fresh wounds. The night cleaning crew had just begun their shift. The sound of water being wrung from a mop echoed softly in the vast, empty hall. And then he saw her. A pregnant woman on her knees, scrubbing the base of a marble column. Her dark hair was pulled back tight strands, sticking to her damp forehead. The oversized cleaning uniform stretched across her swollen belly. She moved slowly, carefully, the way someone does when every breath hurts. She reached up to wipe a higher spot on the column. Her sleeve slid down. Ronan stopped breathing. Dark bruises circled her wrist like a bracelet made of fingerprints. 5 distinct marks, purple, fading into sickly yellow at the edges. The kind of bruises that come from someone who enjoyed holding on too tight. For too long. She lifted her head to brush sweat from her eyes, and the world tilted. There, just above her left eyebrow, was a small, thin scar. Ronan's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that scar. He had been standing 3 feet away the day she got it. They were 9 years old. She had jumped a chain-link fence behind the old laundromat on Hester Street to get his backpack back from Eddie Blaze and his crew. She missed the landing. Blood had poured down her face into her eye. She had wiped it away with the back of her hand, looked at him and said, "I'm fine." Sienna Hart. 17 years gone, vanished one night with her mother and everything they could carry. And now she was here on her knees, cleaning his casino floor at 3 in the morning, pregnant and carrying someone else's violence on her skin. Ronan stood perfectly still in the middle of his own empire, the king of Atlantic City's shadows, and felt something cold and ancient crack open inside his chest. She hadn't seen him yet. She finished the column, picked up her bucket, and turned toward the service hallway. Her steps were quick but uneven, the walk of a woman who had learned that being noticed was dangerous. Only when she disappeared around the corner did Ronan finally move. He pulled out his phone with steady hands that betrayed nothing. "Jax," he said when the bartender answered on the second ring, voice low and rough from too many cigarettes. The new girl on the overnight cleaning crew. Pregnant. Dark hair. Get her name and schedule. Quietly. Jax Harlan paused on the other end. He had known Ronan since they were kids running numbers on the boardwalk. He knew that tone. "Boss, everything all right?" Ronan stared at the wet marble where she had been kneeling. "No," he said simply. "But it will be." He ended the call. By 6 a.m., Mrs. Fallon, the head of housekeeping, received a direct order from Ronan himself. The pregnant cleaner working nights was to be moved to day shifts immediately. Light duties only. No heavy lifting. No scrubbing floors. If she asked why, tell her it was new casino policy for expecting mothers. Nothing more. Mrs. Fallon didn't argue. She had worked for Ronan long enough to understand when a request was actually a command carved in stone. Ronan didn't sleep that morning. He sat in the private office overlooking the ocean, the gray December light pressing against the windows. He kept seeing that scar, kept seeing those bruises, kept hearing the echo of a 9-year-old girl telling him she was fine while blood ran down her face. Sienna Hart was alive, and someone had been hurting her. Worse, she was carrying a child while running from that pain. For the first time in many years, the monster that lived inside Ronan Vale, the one who built this empire with blood and silence, felt something dangerously close to fear. Not for himself, for her. Down in the staff lounge, Jax Harlan poured himself a coffee and muttered under his breath, "Never seen the boss look like that before." He had no idea how much was about to change. Because that night, in the cold neon glow of the Sapphire Coast Casino, a ghost from Ronan's childhood had walked back into his life. And this time, he wasn't going to let her disappear again. 3 days later, the Sapphire Coast Casino hummed with its usual daytime energy. Sienna Hart pushed a light cleaning cart down the wide corridor leading to the VIP lounge. The new uniform felt softer against her skin, and for the first time in weeks, her feet didn't ache quite so badly by midday. She still moved with the same careful precision. Head slightly lowered, shoulders tight. Every time a door clicked shut somewhere in the distance, her body gave a small, involuntary flinch. She didn't know why her shift had changed. Mrs. Fallon had simply said it was new policy for pregnant staff. Sienna hadn't asked questions. Asking questions usually brought trouble. In the shadowed corner of his private office, overlooking the gaming floor, Ronan Vale watched her through the security feed. He didn't blink. He noticed everything. The way she always chose the seat with her back against the wall during her short breaks. The way her fingers hovered over the cracked screen of her old prepaid phone, checking it every few minutes as if waiting for bad news to arrive. The way she kept her left side turned slightly inward, protecting the curve of her belly like it was the only thing left worth guarding. Each small movement carved deeper into his chest. Jax Harlan leaned against the doorframe of the office, arms crossed, watching his boss with quiet concern. "You've been staring at that feed for 2 hours straight, Ronan. That's not like you." Ronan didn't turn around. His voice came low, almost tired. "Her name is Sienna Hart." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You know her, I used to." A long silence stretched between them. Jax finally spoke again, softer this time. "She's running from someone. Word from the streets is, it's Damon Crowe. That piece of shit used to owe big money to the Diamond Reef crew before they cut him loose. Nasty temper. Real nasty. He's been asking around about a pregnant woman matching her description." Ronan's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. He remembered a scrawny 9-year-old girl stepping between him and Eddie Blaze's fists behind the basketball court. Remembered her small voice shouting, "Leave him alone," even though she was half their size. She had taken a punch meant for him more than once. And every time she had wiped the blood from her lip and told him it didn't matter. Now she was carrying a child. And still protecting herself the only way she knew how. By becoming invisible. For the first time in his life, Ronan Vale felt fear that had nothing to do with power or money. It was fear for someone else. That night, he made 2 quiet phone calls. The first went to Dr. Mira Voss, a discreet obstetrician who owed him favors and asked no questions. He arranged a private prenatal visit for the following week. Full checkup, blood work, ultrasound, everything Sienna clearly hadn't been getting. The second call went to Elena Reyes. She ran a small trauma support program for women who had escaped violent homes. Ronan asked her to visit the casino as a guest and find a natural way to speak with Sienna. Just conversation. Nothing that would scare her. Elena had been quiet on the line for a long moment before answering. "You don't usually get involved like this, Ronan?" "This one is different," he replied. He ended the call and stood at the window, watching the gray ocean crash against the boardwalk far below. Down in the VIP lounge the next afternoon, Sienna was wiping down the leather armchairs when a well-dressed woman with kind eyes approached her. "Excuse me. Do you have a second?" Elena Reyes smiled gently, holding a cup of herbal tea. "I'm new here too. These big places can feel so cold sometimes." "Mind if I sit for a minute?" Sienna hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the cleaning cloth. She glanced toward the exit, then back at the woman. Something in Elena's voice felt safe. Just for a moment. Sienna gave the smallest nod and kept working, but she didn't walk away. From the security room upstairs, Ronan watched the two women talk. His hands stayed perfectly still on the desk. But inside, something old and buried was slowly waking up. The boy from Hester Street, who once had nothing, was now the man who had everything. And for the first time, he understood that power meant nothing if he couldn't use it to protect the one person who had once protected him. The ocean wind rattled the windows of the Sapphire Coast Casino as midnight approached. Marcus Vale stormed into Ronan's private office without knocking his face tight with urgency. "Brother, you need to see this." He dropped a tablet on the desk. The security footage played in silence. There, on the grainy black and white feed, was Damon Crowe. He was walking slowly along the staff entrance at the back of the building, hood up, eyes scanning every corner like a predator measuring distance. He lingered near the service door for almost 4 minutes before disappearing into the shadows. Ronan stared at the screen. His expression didn't change, but his knuckles turned white against the edge of the desk. "He's getting closer," Marcus said quietly. This was yesterday afternoon. Ronan didn't answer right away. He simply stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out. The VIP lounge was empty after closing. Only soft golden lights remained, casting long shadows across the leather booths and polished wood. Sienna was finishing the last touches on the bar when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Ronan Vale stood 10 feet away, hands at his sides, his tall frame blocking the only clear path to the exit. For one terrifying second, Sienna's breath caught. Her eyes darted left and right, calculating escape routes the way she had learned to do for years. She took one shaky step backward. "Don't," Ronan said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not him." The words hung in the air between them. Sienna froze. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She clutched the cleaning cloth so tightly, her fingers trembled. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. Ronan took one slow step closer, then stopped, giving her space. "I've known it since the night I saw you cleaning the main lobby." He paused, letting the silence settle. "I recognized the scar." Sienna's hand flew instinctively to the small mark above her left eyebrow. Her eyes widened with sudden painful recognition. "You—" Her voice cracked. Ronan nodded once. "Sienna Hart, Hester Street, 17 years ago." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back hard, refusing to let them fall. "I don't want your help," she said quickly, voice thin and sharp with fear. "I don't want anyone's help. Please, just let me do my job and stay invisible." She turned to leave. Ronan spoke again, softer this time. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm only asking you to listen for 1 minute." Sienna stopped, her back still to him, shoulders rigid. Ronan continued, choosing every word with painful care. "I know you're running from Damon Crowe. I know he's been circling this place, and I know what he did to you." At the sound of that name, Sienna's entire body shuddered. She slowly turned around. Her face was pale lips pressed into a thin line. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then the words came out quiet and broken, like pieces of glass she had carried for too long. 2 years. That's how long I stayed. At first, he was kind, patient. Then I got pregnant and everything changed. He wanted to know where I was every second, who I talked to, what I wore. If I didn't answer fast enough. She looked down at her wrists, then back up at Ronan. He'd grab me, push me. Once he slammed me into the bathroom counter so hard I couldn't stand for 10 minutes. And every single time. He cried afterward and promised it would never happen again. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Before I left, he told me, "If you ever run, I'll find you. No matter how long it takes, you and the baby belong to me." The silence that followed felt heavier than the ocean outside. Ronan stood perfectly still, but inside something dark and cold locked into place. He wasn't protecting her just because she was the girl from his childhood anymore. He was protecting her because the thought of her living another day in that kind of fear made him physically sick. "I'm not him," he said again, quieter this time. "And I won't let him touch you or your child." Sienna looked at him for a long moment, eyes searching his face, as if trying to find the lie. A single tear finally escaped and slid down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily, but more followed. She didn't sob. She didn't break down. She simply stood there crying silently in front of the one person she had once trusted with her whole 9-year-old heart. And still wasn't sure she could trust now. Ronan didn't move closer. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words. He only said, "Go home and rest tonight. You're safe here." Then he turned and walked out of the lounge, leaving her alone with the weight of everything she had just spoken aloud for the first time. Back in his office, Ronan picked up the phone. "Knox," he said, voice flat and final. "I want everything on Damon Crowe. Every past girlfriend, every threat, every move he's made in the last 6 months. Dig until there's nothing left in the dark." He hung up and stared out at the black ocean. The crack in his armor had just become a fracture. And for the first time, Ronan Vale wasn't sure he wanted to repair it. Ronan stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the Sapphire Coast Casino, the Atlantic wind slicing through his coat like frozen blades. Midnight had come and gone. Below him, the boardwalk lights flickered against the black ocean. But up here, there was only the howl of the wind and the distant crash of waves. His phone vibrated in his hand. Knox's voice was clipped and urgent. "He's here. Damon Crowe slipped past the outer perimeter 20 minutes ago. He's 2 blocks from the staff entrance. We have eyes on him, but he's moving closer." Ronan's grip tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. Before he could answer, another call cut in. It was Lena from housekeeping, her voice shaking. "Mr. Vale, it's Sienna. She's in pain. She collapsed in the staff room. She says the baby is coming, early." Ronan didn't hesitate. He was already moving, coat flapping behind him, as he took the private elevator down. He found Sienna curled on a small couch in the staff lounge, face pale and slick with sweat, one hand pressed hard against her belly. Her breathing came in short, panicked bursts. When she saw him, fear flashed across her eyes. "Ronan, something's wrong," she whispered, voice breaking. "It hurts too much. I think the baby." He knelt beside her without thinking, his usual armor of calm cracking wide open. "I've got you," he said quietly. "We're going now." Using the hidden service corridor that only a handful of people knew existed, Ronan carried her to a black SUV waiting at the underground exit. The driver knew better than to ask questions. They sped through the sleeping streets of Atlantic City toward a private wing at the city's most discreet hospital. Dr. Mira Voss was already waiting gowned and ready. The delivery room was bright sterile and filled with the steady beeping of machines. Sienna lay on the bed, gripping the rails, her dark hair damp against her forehead. Every contraction pulled a soft, pained sound from her throat. Ronan stood beside her, unsure if he should be there, yet unable to leave. She reached out suddenly, her fingers finding his hand and clutching it with surprising strength. Her eyes wide with terror locked onto his. "I'm scared, Ronan," she whispered between breaths. "What if she's like him? What if my daughter carries his darkness?" Ronan leaned closer, his voice low and steady, the kind of certainty that came from somewhere deeper than power or money. "She won't," he said. "Your daughter will only know light. I swear it." It wasn't a promise made with guns or threats. It was a promise made with his whole chest. Time blurred in the bright room. Then at 5:12 in the morning, a thin, fierce cry cut through the air. Nova entered the world small and early, but her cry was loud and defiant, like a challenge thrown straight at the darkness that had followed her mother for so long. The nurse placed the tiny baby on Sienna's chest. Sienna looked down at her daughter, tears streaming silently down her face. Her arms curved protectively around the newborn, as if she could shield her from the entire world. She whispered something only Nova could hear, her lips brushing the baby's damp forehead. Exhaustion finally took her. Sienna's eyes fluttered shut, her breathing slowing into the deep sleep of someone who had carried too much for too long. Ronan stepped quietly into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of antiseptic and fresh coffee lingered in the air. He pulled out his phone and made the call. "Draven, Marcus, both of you. Listen carefully." His voice was ice and steel. "Today it ends. No more watching. No more waiting. Move on, Damon Crowe. Now." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Then he walked to the nursery window and stood there, hands in his pockets, staring through the glass. Nova lay swaddled in a white blanket, her tiny face scrunched, fists curled near her cheeks. She looked so small against the world. Ronan watched her breathe slow and steady. In that quiet moment, something shifted inside him. He had spent years protecting his empire with blood and fear. But standing here looking at this tiny life that wasn't his by blood, he understood for the first time what real loyalty meant. It wasn't about guarding the past. It was about fighting for a future that had never belonged to him. Until now. 3 months had passed since that cold December night when Nova entered the world. The winter sky over Atlantic City had softened into early spring, and the boardwalk slowly filled with tourists again. Damon Crowe was arrested at a rundown motel just off the highway. Knox and Elena Reyes had built the case, carefully recorded threats testimony from 2 women he had hurt before, and clear evidence of the night he attacked a casino employee he mistook for Sienna. The arrest happened quietly, without drama or headlines. The trial was held behind closed doors. Ronan did not sit inside the courtroom. Instead, he stood across the street in the shadow of an old brick building collar turned up against the wind, watching from a distance as Sienna stepped out of the courthouse with Nova cradled against her chest. She looked smaller than he remembered, but steadier. When the judge announced the sentence, 9 years in prison, Sienna closed her eyes for a long moment. Then, for the first time since Ronan had known her again, a real smile touched her lips. It was quiet, tired, and full of relief. She didn't cry. She simply held her daughter a little tighter and walked away from the courthouse steps without looking back. A few weeks later, Sienna moved into a small apartment overlooking the ocean in a quiet part of town. She had insisted on paying the deposit herself. The loan from Ronan was written in a simple contract with clear repayment terms and monthly interest. She had made him read every line before signing. He had done so without argument. She began taking online accounting courses in the evenings and started working part-time at the Women's Support Center alongside Elena Reyes. Some days were still hard. Some nights the old fears returned in dreams. But every morning she woke up, made coffee, and chose to keep moving forward. Ronan kept his promise. Every Sunday afternoon he drove to her apartment. He brought groceries, simple meals, and sometimes a new stuffed toy for Nova. He never stayed too long. He never pushed. He simply sat on the living room floor while Nova crawled across his lap, grabbing fistfuls of his shirt with her small hands. He didn't flinch when she drooled on his expensive coat. He only smiled faintly and let her explore his face with curious fingers. One quiet Sunday evening, when Nova was 2.5 years old, she suddenly ran to Ronan as he was about to leave. She wrapped her tiny arms around his leg and looked up at him with serious dark eyes. "Stay," she said. The word came out clear and commanding the way only a determined toddler could say it. Ronan froze. He looked down at the little girl clinging to him, then lifted his gaze to Sienna. She stood in the hallway, a dish towel still in her hands, watching them both. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only something softer, something warmer, something that looked a lot like trust. Ronan crouched down so he was eye level with Nova. He gently touched her cheek with the back of his fingers. "I'll be back next Sunday," he promised softly. Nova studied his face for a moment, then nodded as if accepting the terms. When Ronan stood up, Sienna walked him to the door. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Ronan stepped into the cool night air. He climbed into his car and started the engine. As he drove back toward the bright neon lights of the Sapphire Coast Casino, the city lights blurred past his window. The silence inside the car felt different tonight. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space, like room to breathe, like the beginning of something he had never allowed himself to want. He thought about the girl who had once jumped a fence and bled for a boy nobody cared about. He thought about the woman who had walked into his casino carrying nothing but fear and a child. And he thought about the little girl who had just told him to stay. Ronan kept driving through the dark streets, the ocean whispering somewhere to his left. For the first time in many years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Because real loyalty wasn't about paying back the past. It was about having the courage to give someone a future without shadows. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for writing with us today. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.